Welcome to Sparklines, a special podcast series from Rosov Consulting. I'm your host, Frayda Gonshor Cohen. Each episode is an opportunity to dive into the heart of Jewish life and explore insights from our work alongside inspiring partners. In our previous episodes, we've spoken to experts and colleagues about topics ranging from creating meaningful evaluations and implementing them to the importance of having global perspectives on Jewish education. Today, we're focusing on studying and learning about local Jewish communities. Understanding local Jewish communities has always been at the heart of what we do at Rosov Consulting. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the people behind those numbers, their needs, their hopes, and the stories they tell. In this episode, we'll hear from Laurence Kotler-Berkowitz, Senior Director at Rosov Consulting, and Jessica Mehlman, Associate Vice President of Impact and Planning at Jewish Federations of North America. Together, they share their experiences and insights about community studies and how they help to build stronger, more connected Jewish communities. Local Jewish community studies are, as they say in their name, a powerful tool for understanding who comprises our local Jewish communities. They provide a snapshot of the community, its demographics, its needs, and its potential. Laurence Kotler-Berkowitz, who has spent over 25 years working in this field, reflects on the importance of these studies.
Local Jewish community studies serve a number of different purposes. They are sort of at base an opportunity for communities to learn about themselves, what their resources are, what their population sizes are, how many people live in their community, what the sense of Jewish connection is among the population, what human and social service needs, what are the socio and demographic characteristics of the population. At least at the community level, they're also an opportunity for community building and to sort of take a pulse of what people desire and want and their preferences and their needs from a Jewish perspective.
These studies give us a window into the current state of Jewish life, allowing communities to adapt and grow. Laurence points out that these studies are also essential for helping funders and stakeholders understand where resources are needed most.
So often funders will have a strategic interest in understanding the populations, especially local funders, whether that be a family foundation that is situated in a local community or it can be a community foundation itself. Agencies and other organizations, so like JFSs, day schools, synagogues, Jewish vocational services, all those sort of organizations that make up the institutional infrastructure of local communities have an interest in understanding who they're trying to serve and the characteristics and the needs and the preferences of the Jewish community that they're trying to serve. A third group is simply the members of the community. I think it's important for people to understand the community that they live in, what the challenges and strengths of that community are, what options are available to them, who their peer community members are. And then in a certain sense, all the other local communities are also consumers of local community studies. Every community seems to be interested in comparing themselves to another community. And that makes sense. Like comparisons are a benchmark, right? To understand yourself. So every local community study really serves as a chance for the broader Jewish communal ecosystem to understand itself better and in more granular depth through that process of comparison.
Community studies do more than provide data. They help tell a community's story. Laurence emphasizes that these studies are essential for keeping a community's narrative current and relevant.
Every community has its own sort of story about itself and kind of has its own history, much of which is often true, and some of which has changed over time, and the story hasn't been updated. Sometimes people in leadership positions are relying on their understandings of a community, and none of this is done with bad intentions. It's just lack of data. But oftentimes we're relying on their perceptions and understandings of communities. It could be anywhere from 10 years ago to like 40 or 50 years ago.
In order to gather new data that paints an updated picture, communities have to wrestle with several issues that can arise in implementing community studies.
So there's all sorts of methodological issues we have to deal with. I'll put those aside for just a second. Obviously, one big challenge is budgets and funding. That's always an issue. There are some methodologies that are less expensive and some that are more expensive. And we have those conversations with communities pretty much every time we start to talk to them about a potential study. So funding is obviously one issue. The second is sometimes the nature of relationships within a community, those that are existing already. There are issues around people kind of playing nicely with each other in the sandbox. I think those would be sort of two big structural issues. In terms of methods in particular, there are any number of challenges to running surveys. We have ways of addressing them. Everything from technical things like response bias or non-response bias, selection bias. We know that people who are interested in general in a particular topic are more likely to take a survey on that topic. That is true for Jewish surveys as well. And so we tend to get people who are more engaged taking part. And so we have to adjust for that with statistical weights. We know that certain social and demographic groups are often underrepresented in surveys. Interestingly enough, women are much more likely to take surveys than men. So we often end up with more women in our surveys than men, and perspectives can differ between those two groups. We know historically that people from marginalized communities are less likely to take surveys. So people who identify as anything other than white, when you ask them about race, people who have disabilities, people who identify as members of the LGBT community, all of those groups are traditionally underrepresented in surveys. And so it can be a challenge to get enough of those respondents from those groups to be able to do reliable analysis. We do have ways of addressing this, but it often percolates up as a challenge in local communities.
It's clear that communities need to continually gather new data and update perceptions of their community. Today, there are more ways than ever for communities to learn about themselves, including traditional probability-based community studies, along with interviews, focus groups, non-probability surveys, pulse surveys, and more. A community can be smart about what kind of data they need for their planning and other purposes. This is one topic very much on the minds of the Impact team at the Jewish Federations of North America. Jessica Mehlman, Associate Vice President of Impact and Planning at JFNA, explained some of the considerations that communities should be thinking about today.
I think it's really important for communities to educate themselves as to all of the options that are out there now. They need to understand their budget, and they need to understand what they can get from their budget, and more is not necessarily better. What problem are they trying to solve for? What do they want to learn and understand? And on the back end, this is another big challenge, is that once you have the data, what are you going to do with it? What are you looking for? What do you need to solve for? Are you looking for engagement? Are you looking to raise more money? What do you need to understand about your community that's going to get you to the next step? Because that's going to inform the type of research that you do and the questions that you ask. You may say, we want this really big, multi-stage, random sample population study. That is what we need. You could also say, you know what? I need to solve for X. And what's going to get me that is a market study. That's going to give me everything I need. And quite honestly, more data than I can handle. So that's great. Or you can say, I'm really just trying to solve for this newcomer's solution, or I want to understand preschool families, and all you need is a listening tour, right? It's not just about having data. It's like, what are you trying to understand?
This focus on actionable data is essential. By the time data from a community study is made public, the community has already changed in various ways, as Jessica shares.
We're seeing today that the world is changing so fast. People are so transient that data becomes stale within 3 to 5 years. Like, you can't wait 10 years to invest in a study again. And so our challenge has really been like, what are the other ways that communities can get good data, the right data about their community, and also help them understand that just because we're not doing a random sample population study, this is still really good data that you should trust and that you should use. I think helping communities get past that hurdle of, this is what you can do with the research. It's not just numbers of your community, but let's help you understand why this data is so important, the type of data you're going to get, and that we're going to be there to help you take that data and make it actionable. I think the questions have evolved from just counting the population to understanding what makes the Jews in your community tick, and that people of different generations are most definitely engaging in different ways, and they want different things from the Jewish community at different stages of their lives.
Over the past year, JFNA has been conducting a pilot with 12 communities across the country using shorter pulse surveys to gather data about local community members.
When we were designing this community pulse survey, we started with these pillars of flourishing Jewish community. Educated, engaged, caring, healthy, safe, active, connected. And we went through this exercise of how do you measure that? We'd been talking about it for a while, but what does it actually mean to measure engaged? What does it mean to measure connected? And that was this incredible exercise. And then once we had those metrics, we said, okay, how do we ask the questions?
Another key focus of community learning today is inclusivity. Thinking carefully about how questions are asked in a survey or in an interview can have a real impact on how community members feel a sense of belonging or even alienation.
How do we ask questions in a way to be as inclusive as possible so people see themselves represented in the survey? Like we asked a question, do you feel connected to the local Jewish community? But we also asked, can you show up as your authentic self in Jewish spaces? I don't know that anybody's ever asked that question, but we really wanted to know, are you being forced in a round peg into a square hole, or do you really feel like you can show up in a Jewish space in your community and be who you are and be accepted who you are?
Most community studies rely on the respondents to a survey to identify themselves as Jewish in one way or another. So that can be, they can say that their religion is Judaism. We also give people the opportunity to say that they are secular, atheist, agnostic, have no particular religion, but nonetheless identify as Jewish for reasons of ethnicity or culture or their family or their heritage. There's long been a recognition that Judaism and Jewish community have both religious and some ethnic, cultural, secular bases as well. All these questions about social identities have really given us the opportunity to understand that there is a deep and profound diversity in the Jewish community, just like there is in society in general. We share something in common as Jews, and at the same time, the Jewish population is diverse. And those interactions, I think, are being captured much more today than they were in the past.
Community studies and the work that come out of them are big, audacious projects. And there are more and more opportunities for creating learning from data with more frequency and accessibility.
I feel like we've moved the needle so much in the past year that for so long, these large population studies were the only way to get community data. And they're still a phenomenal tool, but there's so many ways that we're developing, so many new methodologies. It's an exciting time to work in research and data in the Jewish community. And we're really beginning to see excitement in our local communities around finally having this data that they can use.
Engaging leadership and community members is a crucial part of making community studies effective. Jessica discusses how involving leadership in the process can lead to better outcomes.
A community that recently did a listening tour utilized not only all of their professional staff, but they utilized their board of trustees and other leadership in the community to do this research. And it was this incredible leadership engagement tool because everybody listened. And so often we see that the researchers come back with the results of your study and your leadership doesn't believe it, right? Like that can't possibly be true. But because this community engaged their leadership in the actual research and they were there and they heard people say, this is my experience, it was game changing for them. It got the leadership very much on board as they were saying, okay, these are our next steps based on what the data is telling us. This is where we need to invest. Their leadership was all in. They understood it.
The worst thing you can do in a study is have people know that the study is out there and then not share the results, because then people start to get suspicious. Like, what are they hiding? What are they not sharing with us? So having that built in as part of the plan to share the information and to be honest about the information. Sometimes studies come up with information that's disconcerting for a community, but it's always been my perspective. And I know it's Rosov Consulting's perspective also that it's much, much better to share the disconcerting information than to not share it. That ultimately improvement comes from dealing with hard information and challenging information. And I have seen community studies where things get essentially deep sixed, that they're not shared. And that can be a difficult situation.
I think for any large study that you're doing, getting your community leadership on board with the process. And when I say community leadership, it's not federation leadership. It is your agencies, your synagogues, like everybody needs to be on board. It's a big project. And once you have the data, you need everybody on board with what comes next. And the communities that are most effective are those that have a plan in the beginning and how they're going to release the data and dig into the data once they have it. That there are communities that can take actionable steps immediately, as well as understand, like, sometimes this is going to take a little bit more work and can take that data and take that work several years into the future. So you're doing something today and you're engaging the community in the work that's going to come after.
Laurence also reflects on the importance of involving key stakeholders and community members themselves throughout the process.
We typically start off with what we call engagement sessions, which we either can do virtually online, or sometimes we could visit a community in person, in which we talk to key stakeholders in the community. And those can be from organizations, they can be funders, lay leaders, professional leadership, to find out from them what they want to learn from the study, what they think is important to learn. But we also ask them to think broadly about the community. So what are the community's strengths? What are its weaknesses, its opportunities, and its challenges, right? Really to get an understanding of what makes each community distinctive, being able to inform different key stakeholders about the issues that are particularly important to them, I think is an opportunity to show that together we can collect this information. I'm thinking here from the perspective of the community, that together the community can collect this information and distribute it. Like, no one's hoarding the information just for themselves. I think the best communities build into their plans venues and modes of communication with the broader community to share what they've learned and to really just be honest and open and forthright about it.
These insights remind us that community studies are not just about research. They are about bringing people together, creating ownership, and fostering a shared vision for the future. In our work on community studies, we want to be bringing a more data-informed approach that can help communities thrive. We end every episode of Sparklines with 3 sparks of insight that can enhance your community's learning. Today's sparks are: first, community studies are opportunities to tell current, authentic stories about community today. Don't rely on outdated myths. Keep your community story fresh. Second, remember that actionable data drives flourishing and thriving communities. It's not just about interesting data, and we really can know so many interesting things. It's about knowing what your community needs and being ready to act on those needs. Third, engagement is key. When leadership and community members are part of the data gathering process, the findings are more meaningful and lead to more impactful change. Today's episode was hosted by me, Frayda Gonshor Cohen. Thank you to Laurence Kotler-Berkowitz and Jessica Mehlman for participating in the episode. Sparklines is a podcast from Rosov Consulting. Our mission is to provide high-quality research, evaluation, and insights to Jewish organizations, enabling them to make informed decisions and to effectively pursue their strategic goals. Today's episode was produced and edited by Brian Blumenband, along with Arielle, Nissenblatt, and David Woje from Audily. It was mixed by David Woje. Our artwork is by Karen Uribe. If you found this episode useful, share it with a colleague and start a conversation about how your team can use data to help your community flourish. We're back soon with our next episode of Sparklines.